So recently, UFC flyweight Steve Erceg, who has a fight with Brandon Moreno coming up this weekend at UFC Mexico, had some things to say on Ariel Helwani's show about Muhammad Mokaev. And in this video, I want to talk about some different topics, this being one of them. We'll take a look at Mokaev's responses because he has shown support of Steve Erceg in the past. So we'll discuss all of that. Then there's a couple other things I want to talk about, like Alexander Volkanovski making a ludicrous comment, Tom Aspinall starting to turn up the dials as a potential Jon Jones fight looms in the balance, and then some back and forths that we have had from Ilia Topuria and Charles Oliveira. So some things are heating up around those two guys. I think that maybe a potential matchup between those two is likely moving forward. But let's hop into this, starting with the Ariel Helwani show, right? Because I'll go ahead and link all these clips down below, so feel free to check them out. But I want to just basically talk about, kind of the meat and potatoes of what Steve was getting at here. Look, Steve Erceg, he had some things to say about Muhammad Mokaev. I didn't like the way Mokaev interacted with people around him, and he's messaged me since. I'm thinking more and more that he's a massive knob. He seemed like a privileged diva. That's interesting. It was surprising because you would think somebody that grew up the way he grew up would be a little bit more humble. He just seemed like a douche. After I got knocked out, obviously, he messaged me and asked me if I woke up. I'd love to slap him around. Okay, so very important thing right away is Ariel Helwani basically brought this up, right? Because anytime Ariel has the opportunity to stir the pot, try to cause some sort of rift, he's probably going to do that, right? That's just kind of what we've seen from Ariel throughout the years, is whenever he can stir the pot, he's going to take the opportunity. And that's basically what he did here. Now, in fairness, basically, he was saying that Muhammad Mokaev, there's no mystery that Mokaev is a massive name when it comes to the flyweight division. And he's someone that I've been saying for the longest time, I believe is the best flyweight in the world. He's someone that I don't believe should have been cut by the UFC. He should still be on the roster. And he was undefeated in the organization. And his last fight in the organization was against a guy on an absolute tear right now in Manel Cap. So Mokaev, he is a world-class talent, and I believe he's the best flyweight in the world. So basically, Ariel was saying, like, look, what are your thoughts on Mokaev? Because he's someone that is right in title contention or could have even been fighting for a title in the organization. And then Steve just kind of went down this rabbit hole of how he basically doesn't really like Muhammad Mokaev. He hasn't had good interactions with him and whatever. And it's crazy to me that Steve Erceg is going to say that Mokaev is privileged, because let me remind you that Steve Erceg, I believe, was ranked number 10 at the time, where he was coming off of a nice KO victory over Matt Schnell. However, not very impressive, because we've seen how Matt Schnell has been recently in his last, several UFC outings. So big whoop, you knocked out Matt Schnell. And people, a lot of folks out there, they really don't even know the reality of Steve Erceg. He is not some sort of KO artist, right? Steve Erceg is basically a decision merchant, or he goes out there and subs guys. That's how he gets the job done. And there's no question that Steve Erceg is very, very skilled. But to say that Mokaev is privileged, Steve Erceg basically got an undeserved title shot, which, yeah, we can't rip on him too much. I mean, we can rip on him, but Kaya Sakura came into the UFC, got a title shot when he never even fought once in the organization. So could you argue that undeserved title shots are just being thrown around all over in the UFC right now? Yes, we get that. But Steve Erceg's acting like he didn't get an undeserved title shot back when he fought Pantoja. And not only that, he had a very competitive fight with Pantoja. We get that. And Steve Erceg is an outstanding fighter. But to say that he's privileged, dog, yes, it was a close fight with Pantoja. But then the UFC basically gave you a participation trophy, in my opinion, and said, oh, you had a close fight with the champ, so we're going to give you a top contender in the very next fight against Kai Kara France. Not only that, he goes out there and gets knocked the hell out by Kai Kara France. And to add the icing on top, they go, you know what, Steve? That's okay, buddy. We're going to give you Brandon Moreno in your very next fight after you've lost 2 in a row against 2 top guys in the division. You were ranked number 10. You got a title shot when you were ranked at 10. Then you go out there and you get a bounce back matchup against Kai Kara France, which in my opinion he shouldn't have gotten. And now you have probably one of the biggest names of all time in the flyweight division in Brandon Moreno, who's coming off of a masterclass performance over Amir Albazi, who's right on the verge of title contention here, or getting a title shot. And you're going to talk about privileged. Steve Erceg has had so many great opportunities come his way that the UFC has fed him. Now, I do want to point out that Steve is not the only fighter that this type of stuff happens to, right? We've seen, especially in the flyweight division, what they did with Asakura. We've seen guys get title shots that shouldn't necessarily be getting them at the time. But I do want to point out that the flyweight division for Pantoja, they were looking for someone new instead of the same guys that Pantoja has already beaten, instead of going for rematches that Pantoja is probably going to win or trilogies when he's already up 2-0 on guys, right? So I get that they were looking for someone new. But this is crazy that Erceg's talking like this, man, because not only would I think Muhammad Mokaev beat Steve Erceg, but you could have made a case that after that Manel Cap fight, I know that it wasn't a glamorous performance, right? Because there was a lot of heat coming into that fight. Mokaev was someone that eventually would absolutely, without question, be fighting for the title. And I think that he's the guy to beat Pantoja. I've been saying that for the longest time. It's absolutely crazy that Steve Erceg's saying this kind of stuff. Now, and again, he kind of went on the tangent of saying, look, in the way that, Mokaev's been with the UFC and this and that, all we've basically heard from the UFC about Mokaev is ever since he aired out the matchmakers for essentially saying, look, we want you to be more entertaining, resort to more of the striking instead of the grappling, it seemed like everything just went downhill from there. Because whenever we look around and look for these different examples of what specifically Mokaev did, no one can really point to anything other than miraculously when he said that with the matchmakers. And Dana's like, yeah, it sounds like, it's something going on between him and the matchmakers. It's a load of bullshit. Re-sign Mokaev, man. Re-sign the guy. He's the best flyweight in the world. And if Steve Erceg wants to talk so big here, it's easy to do that when the guy is not currently on the roster. But when Mokaev's back on the roster, this is potentially a fight that we could see at some point. And I think Mokaev gets him out of there, right? I think Muhammad Mokaev, like I've said before, he's the most talented flyweight in the world who's not on the UFC roster. When undefeated in the organization, coming off of a win over Manel Cap, and who's a guy on an absolute tear right now, it's crazy to me. Get Mokaev back in the organization, and then maybe we could even get this fight. But it's easy to talk about a guy and talk a bunch of shit when you're not going to have to face them because they're not currently on the roster, even though they should be. Get Mokaev back in the UFC. But here's what Mokaev had to say. I won't say much, but karma will get you for all those lies. You already got KO'd. Hope Moreno will KO you too. I think there's a very good chance that happens, by the way. I think that Moreno probably wins a decision, just puts on a really, masterful type of performance. But there's definitely a chance he gets him out of there because we saw what Moreno did to Kai Kara France, and, we saw what, what was I going to say? We've seen that Erceg was KO'd by Kai Kara France. We saw what Moreno did to Kara France, right? So I think there's definitely a chance of that. By the way, when he fought against Matt Schnell, I came to you and I said, all the best to you. When you fought for the belt, I tweeted 2 to 3 times and wished you the best. But when I got cut, you started lying about me to get attention. Bum. And then Mokaev shared this. I really regret for tweets like this, which I have those. We'll take a look at them in a second here. But I think it's important to note that I even said to Mokaev on Twitter, I was like, look, you are one of the bigger names in the flyweight division. I don't know why people are like being delusional. They just don't like Mokaev and they're like, you're full of crap, man. Blah, 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 blah. Mokaev is one of the biggest names in the flyweight division. The guy has almost 2 million followers on Instagram. He is a big name, dude. He's a big name, especially in the flyweight division. And it's became the popular thing amongst flyweights to almost shit on Mokaev to give you attention. That's what they started doing. And I know that Ariel basically brought it up, so it's not like Steve really went out of his way, but the route that he went down, you get that, Steve is definitely trying to look like stir some things up here and try to make some headlines. But here's what Mokaev had said. He dug up these old tweets. Erceg won this fight. What do you guys think? Hashtag UFC 289. Don't get me wrong. There's no hate on Pantoja and Erceg, 2 top fighters who are just doing their job. They don't make fights as much as I know. I just want to fight with the best fighters in the world and challenge myself. That's why I'm in the UFC. Already beat 2 title challengers. Mokaev, the guy, he's 24 years old, man. Imagine being that damn good. And he's 24 years old. He still is he's not even in his prime, really, right? As good as the guy is, there's so much ahead of this young man. And it drives me crazy that he's not in the organization. I'm hoping he gets back into it here very, very soon. But, him messaging Erceg saying, are you awake from the knockout yet? It's like, fighters do this kind of stuff, man. They play these games with each other. So it's like, it's crazy how they just single out Mokaev for this type of stuff. It's absolutely crazy. Like we see fighters go on these tangents, send DMs to fighters playing these types of games, right? Because eventually when Mokaev was in the organization, there was definitely a chance that he could have fought a guy like Steve Erceg, right? So again, here we go. But then, he had this on here. I really want to see Erceg win this fight with, the Best Buy Steve image here, looking like Steve Carell out here. Look, Mokaev basically dug up the receipts of showing the support to Erceg. Then he sent the DM, so that's what Erceg was saying. Look, at the end of the day, fighters are fighters. As Dana says, this is the fight business. And stuff like this happens, man. Guys troll each other. They try to poke around and play those kinds of games. It's clear to me that Erceg was trying to make some headlines here. It seems like, because that seems like it's the popular thing to do amongst flyweights, because they don't have to worry about fighting Mokaev right now because he's not on the roster. And it's almost like they want to shit on Mokaev because that's like almost kind of the angle that the UFC has kind of went with in a way. And other people are going with, get Mokaev back in the UFC, man, because I think he's a champion and will be the champion. Okay. Let's move on to Topuria and Oliveira. So Ilia Topuria is asked if he'd go for a walk with Charles Oliveira. Actually, yes, to give him a bit of culture and teach him something, because it's obvious that kid hasn't even read a single page of a newspaper. Another question, please, because this isn't a good time to talk about someone like him. Okay, so a lot of this kind of stemmed from when they asked Charles Oliveira. We had Chael Sonnen out there kind of saying these things like Oliveira doesn't want to fight, Oliveira doesn't want to fight Topuria, and we kind of had these different things floating around to where Oliveira's like, he'll fight anybody, right? And that's kind of what Oliveira cleared the air on. But he basically said that he doesn't think Ilia is basically big news or a big deal right now. I mean, there's no way that Charles Oliveira believes that. And if he does believe that, he's out of his goddamn mind. Ilia Topuria is one of the biggest names in the UFC right now. I've been saying before that number one is Islam Makhachev in terms of the best fighter in the organization at present. And number two, considering what he's done recently, I would put Topuria in that position. And that's why the Islam versus Ilia fight is so massive. And that's why everyone's talking about it, because it's basically the number one guy versus the number two guy, have them clash. It's a mega fight. That's why people want that fight. But so this was basically, I think, Ilia kind of, digging back into that, saying, who's this guy think he is, saying that I'm not big news? Ilia Topuria is one of the biggest names in the UFC right now. He's one of the best fighters in the organization, but he's also a big deal, man. He gives us these like prime McGregor vibes with the trash talk, the brashness. He dresses nice. He's got the swag to him. And not only that, that's all important things to have, obviously, when building yourself. But you have to go out there and back it up. And guess what Ilia has done? He's went out there and basically backed up the stuff that he said. He's like, I'm going to KO Volk. He did it. He says I'm going to KO Holloway. He did it. So when you're doing those types of things, it's going to elevate you very, very quickly. And this obviously upset Charles Oliveira. He says, look, Ilia Topuria was disrespectful, right? And then here's what he said. He reacts to Topuria's disrespectful comments about him. I've been in the UFC for 15 years and I've never spoken poorly about anyone. I think Topuria was disrespectful with what he said. I just want to remind everyone that the toughest division is lightweight. I've been in it for years, so I have something to say. I know the firepower I have. I think Topuria needs to get into the division more calmly, more slowly, because there are a lot of tough guys who deserve respect. Now, we know that the lightweight division has some of the biggest stars in the sport, right? We get all that. We have Islam, Charles, we have Gaethje, Poirier. The list goes on and on. Lightweight has some huge names and has some of the more entertaining fighters and has some of the best fighters in the world. The weight class does have, I would say that it's definitely a top weight class, but is it the best right now? I mean, it's got the best fighter in the UFC in it, right? In Islam Makhachev, and now we have Topuria, so you could definitely put it up there. I mean, middleweight's on fire right now. We have some very stacked divisions, so I get what he's saying. Lightweight has firepower right now. But you just said that Ilia Topuria is not big news, and it's crazy to me that one of the biggest stars in the sport, who is coming off of one of, if not the best back-to-back run in UFC history, goes out there, KOs Alexander Volkanovski, one of the featherweight GOATs, a top fighter of all time, goes out there and does the same thing to Max Holloway, who's never been KO'd, one of the best featherweights of all time, a top fighter of all time, in back-to-back wins. after Holloway just went out there and put on a masterclass against Gaethje, then KO'd him in the final 10 seconds at UFC 300. Like, it doesn't get much better than what Ilya just did. And he's coming into the weight class because he says he can't make 45 anymore, vacates the title. He's a big deal. I would think that people would be signing up to be like, you know what? This loudmouth, brash Ilia Topuria, who's a big name, if I can go out there and beat him, I'm putting myself right in the title conversation. I would make the case that if any contender that stepped up to fight Ilia Topuria, if Ilia doesn't get the Islam fight, you win that fight, you fight for the title. Without question. Ilia Topuria, I think that he beats almost everyone in the lightweight division. I think Arman's a hard fight for him. All of the fights are difficult, like especially Oliveira and Arman. I don't think he beats Islam. I think that that's the one guy he can't beat. I think he can beat Oliveira. I think he can beat Arman. I mean, even though those I would say are probably the two toughest fights outside of Islam, obviously. So, but I would be chomping at the bit to fight this guy. He's a big brat, a big brass star. And if you could be the one to give him his first L, what does that say for you, man? And Oliveira, he is a guy that always shows up and basically fights the who's who, right? So to say that Charles is necessarily ducking Ilia, I don't know if I would go that far, I guess. But it definitely seems to me how all of a sudden Ilia, since coming up to lightweight, everyone's like, it's like there's all these guys that are trying to play matchmaker and not involve Ilia Topuria. They're all like, he needs to show something. When you go out there and do those kinds of things and you're as big of a name as Ilia, that comes with perks in the UFC, man. We have seen that where guys get to essentially skip the line, get right into a top contender fight or something along those lines. And at the end of the day, if Islam and Ilia doesn't happen, I think Charles versus Ilia is incredibly likely that it happens. And that's kind of what we're building to here between these guys. And now Ilia Topuria is saying that his new nickname will be El Leyenda in Spanish, which is the legend. So, this guy, man, he's got all the confidence going on right now. He's brash. He's got that aura of invincibility to a degree because he's going out there backing up the things that he's saying. Man, him versus Islam's a massive fight. I think it's the biggest fight in the UFC. I don't know that we get it next. I think that we see, an Ilia versus Charles type of matchup, but considering the back and forth between these guys, it seems like that is a fight that is already building itself. So we'll see kind of how that goes, something to keep our eye on. But this was craziness right here. Alexander Volkanovski says, I don't believe anyone can beat me. The only person I can see giving me a tough fight for 5 rounds is Islam Makhachev. Everyone else has got a puncher's chance. So, I mean, obviously, Islam is the guy to definitely beat him, right? He's already done it twice. But to say that everyone else has a puncher's chance, so you're saying that Ilia Topuria beat you by a puncher's chance. You don't want to talk about the setup. You don't want to talk about how Ilia Topuria was making his reads in the first round, chopping at that lead leg, taking out the base of Volkanovski, beating him up with that calf kick, making him a stationary target, backing him up against the fence, throwing the right hand over the top, coming to the body, and then following up with a vicious right hand over the top that slept Volkanovski bad. That's not a puncher's chance. That's a tactical approach from Ilia Topuria and went out there and starched Volkanovski. This is just bad by Volkanovski here, man. And listen, I feel like if you're a fight fan, we all love Volkanovski, man. We all kind of have that soft spot for Volkanovski. I'm a big Volkanovski fan. This is ludicrous. Basically insinuating that Ilia, it was a puncher's chance. Ilia Topuria had a perfect setup and got you out of there. He chopped at the calf, hindered your movement because Volkanovski relies on a bunch of movement and got you out of there. Come on, Volk. That's why I got come on, Volk on here. On ESPN, the come on, man. This is a come on, man type of moment. Come on, Volk, dog. Yes, Islam, over the course of 5 rounds, that's when we saw someone go 5 rounds, specifically in the first fight, and beat Volkanovski. So I guess he's saying in a 5-round fight, if I don't get KO'd by Ilia, I get him, I outpoint him or whatever it might be. Don't take away from the fact that Ilia set you up, man. He strategically broke you down and got you out of there. Don't take credit away from Ilia. Last but not least, I love this right here, man. I love this right here. Tommy Boy turning up the dials. Listen, I've been saying for the longest time, I just don't know that this fight happens. Between Aspinall and Jones, we've recently heard Dana White saying, look, the fight's basically done, but it's not done. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Is it done? How can you say it's done, but it's not done, right? And then it basically sounds like there's just one more little thing that needs to get done in order for this to be, cash signed, delivered, whatever that saying is. So it sounds like we are actually close to getting this. So I'm hopeful, man. I'm really hopeful. But this is what we need from Tom Aspinall. His dad recently, I covered that in one of my videos, was coming out taking some shots at Jon Jones. Aspinall has started to turn up the heat a little bit. We saw at UFC London, he was flashing the duck, right, when the camera was on him. Tom Aspinall believes Jon Jones is afraid to fight him. Jon is conning the public. He didn't want to fight Ngannou for 3 years, and now he's not wanting to fight me for over a year. This was on Impulsive. So I like that Tom Aspinall was on Impulsive. I'm not a big Logan Paul fan, but that's a big platform, right? So getting Aspinall on those types of podcasts that are going to open him up to all, to the younger audiences, maybe people that aren't fight fans, this is good, right? And we know Logan Paul and Dana/UFC have a relationship, so maybe that is something to do with this, to start pushing Tom Aspinall a little bit more, which is what they need to do because he's the future of the heavyweight division, and I believe Tom can be a huge star. So this is what Tom has to do, right? Brendan Schaub, not that long ago, I posted on Twitter about this, where Schaub was talking about it's not going to cut it playing Mr. Nice Guy, right? Tom Aspinall's this nice guy. He's very respectful, which is great, and I love that about him. But in order to poke the bear in Jon Jones, you can't do that. You can't stroke the ego of Jon Jones because he's going to be like, yeah, I know I'm the GOAT. Because Dana White already tells us enough. If we walk into a room and Jon Jones is in that room, you know who's walking out of that room. It's Jon Jones. Like we already hear the UFC and Dana White stroke the ego of Jon Jones 24/7. So someone, specifically the dangerous opposition that is his next fight, if he's going to fight again in the UFC, it's going to be Aspinall. Dana's basically already said that. We need you coming after Jon Jones. We need some heat on this Tom Aspinall, and he finally is starting to turn up the dials because exactly what he's saying here, I agree. I agree with them because why is it that every single time, now granted, I do want to point this out. Jon Jones fought Daniel Cormier twice. He fought Alexander Gustafsson in the rematch, and we saw that he showed levels after a close fight with Gustafsson. So Jon Jones has had some tough fights at light heavyweight, right? We've seen that. But we saw what happened when Jan Blachowicz was on his tear, right? That fight was supposed to happen, never happened. Jon goes to heavyweight. Goes and fights Cyril Gane, then fights Stipe Miocic, and never fought Francis Ngannou. It's almost like he waited, and then now with Aspinall, he's playing these games. So it's like whenever Jon senses a super dangerous challenge in his path, and he looks at it and says, look, I think I could win this fight, but this is one of those matchups that I'm like, there's definitely a shot here. You know that he felt that way about Ngannou. You know he feels that way about Aspinall. And back in the day, I'm sure he felt that way about Jan. Right, when Jan Blachowicz was on his tear, right? So again, Ngannou and Aspinall to me are much scarier than Jan Blachowicz. This is heavyweight. But make no mistake about it. It's funny how it works when these dangerous challenges, specifically at heavyweight, because we saw it with Ngannou, like Tom is mentioning, and now we're seeing it with Aspinall to where Jon all of a sudden he's already difficult. We've already heard Hunter Campbell in the UFC basically say that Jon Jones is kind of hard to deal with anyway, right? Especially when it comes to getting things done. It's always amazing how all these different things have to happen for Jon all these different terms, all these different things have to be met to Jon's liking to take these super dangerous matchups. Have you noticed that? With Francis Ngannou and now with Tom Aspinall. We'll use those examples because it's at heavyweight. And then when they leave, oh yeah, Francis Ngannou, this and that. It's like, yeah, now that he's gone out of the organization, of course you're going to say those things. This fight needs to happen. And the UFC, I think that they may get this done. I think that they're going to throw Jon Jones a bunch of money if that's what's holding this up, which I mean, I don't know what else would really be holding this up, right? I know that, the TV deal stuff is in the balance. Maybe they're waiting for the new deal or I don't know. But whatever it is, this is an investment by the UFC, in my opinion, because if they give Jon Jones a bunch of money and Jon wins, well, then Dana and the UFC, you know how they're going to be. Jon's the GOAT. Look what he did. He took out this dangerous Tom Aspinall, who a lot of people think is going to beat him, and all these different things. And then if Tom wins, he's able to be the first guy basically to beat Jon Jones and turn him into a star. Because we've seen that that's how this works, man. Activity, going out there, beating the big names as you're trying to build yourself, the guys like the OGs, you go out there and beat them and add that to your resume. That's how you make a star. That's how you build the stars. I think that's what the UFC sees here, obviously. They know Jones isn't going to be around much longer. Jon recognizes the challenge here. I still think that there is clearly a path to victory for Jon if he can make it through the early portion of the fight. I definitely see scenarios in which he could beat Tom Aspinall. But man, early on, we know Tom's athletic. We know he's powerful. We know he's got dynamite in his hands. It's a dangerous fight. Jon Jones knows it, man. But I'm excited. Tom's turning up the dials. This is what he has to do, man. But if you guys enjoyed this video, do me a favor. Please give it a like. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you do not miss an upload. I would appreciate it. See you next time.